After losing both legs as a child, he was told he would never be able to function in society. Our next guest turned what many saw as a limitation into a platform for change. Spencer West climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, inspiring millions around the world. With more than 4 million followers on TikTok, he uses humor, vulnerability, and truth to challenge how we see disability, identity, and possibility. Now he's sharing his most personal work yet in his latest book, Breaking Free, about shedding expectations and finally stepping into authenticity. Good morning, Spencer.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. All right, I just disappeared on my half of the screen, but that's all right. As long as we can see and hear you, that's good. All right, Spencer, you were born in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Share with people the congenital situation that you were born in, the condition sacral agenesis.
Yeah, so it was a genetic disease that I was born with that affected the muscles in my legs. So at the age of 2, they were amputated just below the knee in hopes that I could use prosthetics and get around that way. But unfortunately, that didn't work out. So then at the age of 5, they were amputated just below my pelvis, which is what you see now. And so now I navigate the world walking on my hands and using a wheelchair.
When doctors said you would never walk or live independently or not be able to function in the outside world, how old were you when you were aware of that type of statement? Or did your parents not really share that with you early on?
Yeah, I didn't know that until I was much older. My parents were really great at treating me just like everyone else. And what I mean by that is, I took gymnastics, I took swimming lessons, I did a lot of the same things that other kids did. I obviously did it a bit differently because I have a physical disability. But for all intents and purposes, they treated me just like everyone else. And really, taught me how to live as independent as possible based on my disability.
Yeah. You experienced some bullying. Of course, this is something that kids would naturally do, and some isolation. Lessons learned there.
Yeah, I think, for me, the biggest lesson is what I learned in college. When I went to college, I no longer had the community that I built in my small town in Wyoming. And so I had to learn to be with myself. And that's part of what my book is about, is learning to let go of these expectations that we put on ourselves. So I had to learn to eat lunch alone every now and then, and what it meant to be independent without my sort of community. And then that also allowed me to really pay attention to, what expectations have I been leaning into that don't serve me anymore? And what are things that I care about? And what do I want to study? And what do I want my life to look like? These are questions that I had never asked myself before.
Yeah, because, when you deal with bullying or isolation, it can douse your flame or it can ignite your fire. And it sounds like for you, at times it ignited your fire. You had the confidence to join the cheer squad.
I did, yeah, in high school. My last year of high school as a senior, my guidance counselor was like, I think it would really look good on your transcripts if you did a sport. And because I'd done tumbling so often throughout my life, I thought, well, this is the closest thing that I think I can do. And what was really cool is we went to the state cheerleading competition that year and we took first place as the #1 squad out of the entire state. So it was it was the first time for me where I realized I can contribute to a team and collectively we can do some really great things for our community.
Yeah, you also realized the power of words. You were influenced by movies, TV, theater, music, strong storytelling, and then you shared your personal story your freshman year, and then all of a sudden when you're done, you receive the feedback.
Oh, yeah. For me, there was an advocate named Naomi Ortiz who was so lovely, and I'd been sharing a bit of my story and how I had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and they gave me some really beautiful feedback, which was really helpful. They said, you don't really represent the disability community. Not every disabled person can climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and that's not helpful. And they used a term called super crip, which means I'm a disabled person that can do extraordinary things that most other disabled people can't, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And, one of the things that they told me was you really should focus on interdependence and this idea that you had a lot of help in order to get to where you needed to go. And so that forced me to really lean into my disability identity and understand how I can show up better and differently for my community and not do as much harm as I was doing before that conversation.
Yeah. And speaking of accomplishing things, you're the first in your family to graduate from college.
I was, yeah. My parents hadn't gone to college, so it was one thing that was really important to us. And I'm really grateful that I went. And, my aunt gave me the best advice. She said, college is a great way to figure out what you want your career to be, but you'll learn more about yourself and life than anything else.
Yeah, it's so funny because a lot of us go to college and we think we know exactly what our career is going to be, and then God has other plans, right? In 2008, you
Correct.
traveled to Kenya with the Free the Children, We charity, and you helped to build schools and engage with local communities. Where did that come from? Because before you graduated from college, you had a communications degree. How did you get connected with this group?
Yeah, so I was feeling a bit disappointed where my life had gone. I graduated and I couldn't get a job in my field, and so I was working a job that I didn't care about, that I wasn't passionate about. And a friend invited me to go on a volunteer trip with them to Kenya. And so I went, and it was a life-changing experience. And truthfully, Deborah, the moment that changed everything is when I got to share my story with some of the local kids. And a young girl said to me that she didn't know something like this, meaning the loss of my legs, could also happen to white people too. And
Oh.
that's how I sort of started to understand, oh, maybe there's something to my disability. Before it was just something that happened to me. And I never really leaned into it as an identity. And that's also what I talk about in the book is, the importance of leaning into our identities and exploring them and understanding what that means for them and how we can use them, and how they become our superpower. So this trip really helped me do that and helped inspire me to then become a speaker.
Yeah, and it's amazing so many times how someone may look at a disability and don't understand the power of that disability. Because for you to do something like climb Mount Kilimanjaro, no one else has an excuse. Okay, no one else has an excuse. You didn't let your disability get in your way at all. Okay, so the idea to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, first of all, that is crazy for like the best athletes of the world. But for you to say, I'm gonna do that. Hey, that looks fun.
I know. First, I have to say, I'm not the first disabled person to climb Kilimanjaro, and I'm definitely not the last. And truthfully, we didn't want that to be the focus. For me, I was traveling the world telling people to make a difference, and I had never physically done it myself. So part of climbing Kilimanjaro was to have the experience to then go back to tell the audiences that I was speaking to, hey, I've done this. I raised over $500,000 for clean water. Here's how it went for me. Here's the support I had. Here's what went wrong. I had my two best friends that were helpful in supporting me physically and emotionally the first half. And then the second half, they needed my help. So I just really brought back all of those lessons. But for me, it was to show people that change is possible. Not necessarily that, a disabled person can create change, but just this idea that change is possible. And if we lean into what we care about and our authentic identities, a lot can happen.
Yeah, yeah, it became a global media moment, and to find your public platform, you heard from people around the world, and so many times people have a plan and they have to pivot and do something else, and it's so hard for them to pivot. Your entire life, just about, you've had to pivot. Like instead of using your legs, your arms become your arms, hands, and legs all at the same time.
Yeah, this is a lesson that a lot of disabled folks know. We have to be resilient. A part of it because we want to be, but part of it because we have to be, because the world is still not set up for folks with disabilities to navigate and fully show up as themselves. So a mix of it is, how I was raised and some really important lessons my parents instilled in me. But the other part is I have no choice. If I'm not resilient, I don't get to exist in this world.
Yeah. Okay. It was featured in a documentary, Redefine Possible. Okay. You mentioned a couple of times about being true to yourself and being authentic. At 21, you had come out as gay to your family and friends, but you were afraid to do that publicly because you thought that would impact your brand in a negative way. But I think what you found out on the end of that is a lot about what you talk about in this book, is that sometimes we lean too much into the outside expectations. Half the time, most of those people don't really care. They just like you for you, but we put a lot more pressure on ourselves.
Totally. And part of that was I wasn't necessarily afraid to be out publicly. I was working at an organization that, although they were comfortable with me being queer inside, they didn't want me to talk about it publicly. So it was more their perspective. And part of it was they wanted to protect me. And part of it was they were, giving into specific donors that might have an issue with it. And so that's what was really challenging. That's why I had to hide a lot of my sexual orientation, was because someone else asked me to. I really definitely wanted to do it. And I did. And in fact, it was so lovely. I got to tell my coming out story for the first time publicly on June 26th in 2015, when the Supreme Court made gay marriage legal in the United States. So
Yeah.
it was a really lovely sort of moment to be able to come out on that very beautiful and celebratory day.
Yeah. All right. So you have over 4 million followers across social platforms. You blend humor, disability awareness, LGBTQ plus storytelling, all of it together. And that humor piece is so important because for people, when they first meet you, might not want to come across as being humorous. They might want to feel sorry for you. Like, don't feel sorry for me. I got this, right? And so using humor is such a great way. And
Oh, sorry, Deborah, I didn't hear your
okay.
question
It
there.
was
So sorry.
the video that you got over 200 million views using your humor, and you're literally hopping all over the house and having a great time.
Totally. Yeah. I found that that disarms people. And I get seeing someone like me, specifically without legs, can be a bit jarring and people don't know what to do. So I try to incorporate humor whenever possible because it breaks the tension. And then we can realize, like, oh, I'm just a human. We can have a conversation and chat about whatever it is we need to chat about. But yeah, humor's been paramount to my journey.
Yeah. All right. You released your book in May, Breaking Free, Stop Following Expectations and Start Following Yourself. What feedback have you gotten on this so far?
Oh, it's been so lovely. Actually, a friend of mine reached out and said, they're in like a career transition and looking to figure out what they want to do next. And they're like, your book inspired me to reach out to my old football coach and ask him, what did you see in me all those years ago
Wow.
to put me in a leadership role that I'm not seeing now? And so it's just so lovely to get that kind of feedback because that was the hope. Although the book is my story, at the end of every chapter, I have questions and exercises for people to do in their own lives to break free from their own situations. Because I didn't want the book to just be about me. I also want it to be a helpful guide for other folks as well.
Yeah, and that it has been. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for what you do.
Oh, thanks, Deborah. It's such a pleasure.
All right. You can purchase your copy of Breaking Free, Stop Following Expectations, and Start Following Yourself wherever books are sold.